Because for me, the moment that I had one sip, I'm thinking about the next one, creating some kind of strategy of how I'm going to get the next drink in a way that doesn't make it obvious that I need that next drink. So everything would be strategized around the alcohol, and then other drugs came in over time, whether it's cocaine or ketamine, MDMA, etc., etc. So 14 years old, I wish I could say that it didn't start off that bad and then it got worse over time, but it started bad and only got worse. I wrote that I am 24 years old and I've found myself in the clutches of alcoholism and I don't know what to do. And I wrote it out loud to no one specific. I had no idea that, everything that's happening now, 9 years later, would have happened. I just desperately needed to get well. And I knew that if I didn't take some kind of public accountability for it, I would relapse again and no one would have to find out.
Today on the Seano Show, we are joined by a force, a woman, straight up. Listen, I think you're gonna like what I wrote about you. A woman who has made it her mission to reclaim truth, sovereignty, and radical self-honesty in a world that's forgotten the power of both. Africa Brooke is an internationally recognized speaker, writer, and consultant who helps individuals and organizations break free from the grip of self-censorship, addiction, shame, and fear. She's lived it. She's healed through it, and now she's teaching others how to live unapologetically awake. This isn't a conversation, ladies and gentlemen. It's a homecoming to your highest self. Please welcome the brilliant, the bold, the beautifully human Africa Brooke. Welcome.
Oh, wow. Oh my God. What an introduction. Thank you so much. That's the energy that I need this afternoon. Thank you so, so, so much.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. So, oh my gosh, I have so many things I want to talk to you about. I thought I was going to break it up in 3 parts. And of course, you and I, we're just going to riff. We're going to make some beautiful jazz here. But I thought the first part would be growing up in an alcoholic family, okay? And then work our way into your own recovery, your own journey, and then your business, your consulting, who you are, your books, your messaging, what we're learning. How does that sound?
That sounds wonderful. And you know what? Before I dive in, I would be so curious to know how you found me and how you came across my work and my voice.
Yeah. So somebody sent me a reel of yours and immediately it just dropped me. It's like, first off, you're a sober sister. I've been sober 38 years and there's a fierceness in your message, but there's so much warmth and love. And I knew that it wasn't something that you learned at Yale. This is something that, what we know they don't teach at Yale. And you came across this hard-earned, and it was powerful. And it really, I was like, I need to reach out to this person. And that's how it went down. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much. My name is Africa, and everything that leads me to the business side of things, all of these worldly labels that I wear in the world, be it writer, consultant, speaker, etc., even the platform that I have, all of it has been so accidental in many ways. It's been purposeful, but it's been so accidental. My journey starts in 2016 when I was 24 years old and I just needed to get well. And that's where the addiction piece comes in, which I'll elaborate on a little bit later as we go. But I think laying that groundwork is very important in truly understanding who I am as a person and why I really have this conviction and fierceness when it comes to people speaking courageously, people pushing back against things that don't make any sense, But if we go back a little bit more, I was born and raised in Zimbabwe. So Zimbabwe is in the south of Africa, right next door to South Africa. And I grew up there and until I was 9 years old. And my story in Zimbabwe is a very important one because obviously people's childhoods shape a lot of who they are, but especially those who have grown up in homes where domestic violence is the norm, which is the home that I grew up in. And all of that was held together by my father's alcoholism. And at the time, there's no language, in my culture like alcoholism. Maybe there is now, but at that time, there was nothing like that. It's either just Maxwell, my father's name. Maxwell drinks a little bit too much, but so do his brothers, but so do all the men around them. It's just the norm. And because of the hold that religion has, and of course, religion can be a wonderful thing, but it depends on how it's used or how it's weaponized. So from the culture that I'm from, if you are experiencing any hardship, especially in relation to abuse or addiction or any offshoots of that, you don't speak to anyone. You pray it away. You go to church and you pray it away and you say absolutely nothing. So my father suffered a great deal because of that, because of the culture that was just the norm at the time. But what I didn't realize for myself was that I would end up following my father's footsteps. And it didn't take that long for me to end up doing that. So he was very, very abusive, physically abusive to my mother, but to also me and my siblings. We just never knew what version of my father we were going to get. Sometimes depending on what kind of drunk he was, I always think of this very specific time where he was happy drunk, which was very rare. But he was happy drunk and he came home with his briefcase after work. And he used to work at a paper company and they had these pink papers, worksheets, they were pink. So they were very attractive to me and to us as children. And on this day, he was very, very happy for whatever reason. Maybe it was payday, or maybe he just felt good within himself. And he opened his briefcase and he gives us these papers and he tells us to draw him something nice, draw me something nice, which was very rare for my dad to be so, just so open and sort of giddy and childlike. But he said, draw me something nice to all of us. So we drew, we spent hours drawing. My mum was very happy, but she was also curious, is my dad sure that he wants us to be drawing on these papers? But, he's sure, he's insisting. And the next day, it was a weekend, he wakes up and he remembers absolutely nothing about coming home, opening the briefcase, insisting that we draw him wonderful pictures. What my dad saw that morning is that we had disrespected and disobeyed him and that we are just absolutely vile children who don't know how to behave. How could we do this to his work? Because we had drawn and scribbled and, the aftermath of it was right there in the living room. And we got beaten quite badly for that. So that's just an example of we never knew what version of my father we were going to get. Can we even trust his joy? Can we even trust the happiness? Or are we going to be punished for it in some kind of way? So that created the home that I grew up in, where there was just so much hyper vigilance and so much paranoia. But what that also created for me as a young child is compulsive lying, because I learned how to lie so that I could manage my father, so that I could, and but that comes outside of the home. It follows you to school and it follows you everywhere. And then you realize the benefits and rewards of lying and never really telling the truth. And for me, it started with embellishing who my father was, not in terms of status or anything like that. But I would tell other kids that my father was so wise, that my father was so kind, that my father was so loving, all of the things that he might have been, but I never experienced much. I sort of exaggerated his character, and then I started to exaggerate other things. So I'm speaking about all of those dark things, but at the same time, I'm so grateful to have grown up with siblings, because we got to create a world of our own amongst all of that. And I'm also so grateful to have lived in a country like Zimbabwe, where we had space and we had land, and you don't need to be rich or to have money. It's just the way things are in that country, So we could just play and climb trees and just create so many worlds of our own within all of that. And it was the norm, that you get beaten sometimes, you get hit, you do something wrong, but also you have days that are really lovely where you get to play But alcohol was omnipresent within the home. My mum never drunk. She has never touched a drop in her entire life. And she was quite religious as we were growing up. And my father also resented her for how religious she had become because she wasn't always. So there were so many different things, that underpinned his own addiction. But I really got to see the duality that I speak about a lot in my work now, which we'll get to a little bit later on. I got to first experience it within my home where I had to hold, I always say this, but it really was way for me to learn how to hold multiple truths about people. I had to hold multiple truths about my father because there were very rare moments where he could be so patient and so kind and such a good listener. So I had to hold that, but also hold how he was the majority of the time. So I would say, actually, without even realizing it, that's where my curiosity for the human shadow took form, in really understanding the many layers and multiple truths of people, that people are not actually all good or all bad, But then I actually got to see what alcohol can do to people. And we left Zimbabwe when I was 9 years old. So this was all happening before the age of 9. I would say it took its darkest turn with my dad in the way that I experienced it from about 6 to 9 years old. So 3 years, which feels like a lifetime when you're a child, because you have nothing else to do but focus on what is happening. We left Zimbabwe when I was 9 years old because of the economic decline. This was in 2001. And my mother needed to escape my father. But also in our culture, you don't really divorce. So the plan was for her to come to the UK with us, the kids, and to start a new life. And then my father was to follow on a year or two after. That never transpired because he ended up dying because of alcohol. He ended up dying back in Zimbabwe. And you know what? I didn't say this out loud until maybe a few years ago when me and my sister sat down to talk about it. I have never felt relief at hearing about the death of someone, but I can quite clearly remember as a 10-year-old, the relief that I felt when I heard that my father had died. And not because I hated him, but I knew that we were finally going to experience peace. I knew that I would no longer have to walk into his room and to cover my nose instantly, because it got to a point where, even though my father was a beautiful, beautiful man, it got to a point where the alcoholism was so bad, he wasn't washing himself anymore. He would put on his suit and go to the civic center, which is pretty much kind of like the town center, and he would just sit there all day and just drink. And we would even see him when we were walking back from school and just not tell people that this is my dad. So the relief that I felt was that I was never going to have to see that again. I was never going to smell the smell of that room again, because it got to a point as well where he wasn't going to the bathroom. He would just urinate in bottles and just leave them in the room, So the decline was very, very visible. But again, I didn't realize the true evil of alcohol, the true evil of the spirit. As a child, you don't quite understand it. And then we moved to the UK, and my father passed away, and then life continued. And then I discovered alcohol for myself when I was 13 or 14. And my goodness, it's amazing the way patterns work. You don't realize you're in a pattern until you see it for the first time. And usually you see it when you've either burned everything to the ground, or when someone is telling you that you're burning things to the ground and you can't quite see it. But for me, at 14 is when I started replicating my father's pattern. What started as just a way for me to connect with other children, because here in the UK, I don't know what it's like where you are, but in the UK, it really is seen as a rite of passage, especially binge drinking. Binge drinking is just seen as just something you do when you're around 12 and up, and some people get over it, and it's just the way that it is. So my addiction hid in plain sight from the age of 14 up until 24. And my addiction truly made me believe that I wouldn't be able to experience peace or intimacy or connection or sex or humor or anything without it, without alcohol, without binge drinking. And blacking out was the norm for me from the very first time that I drank. I blacked out. And I just thought that it happens to everyone. I honestly believed everyone blacked out. Until I got sober at 24, I believed that everyone blacked out because that's what happened to me almost every time. I didn't know the concept of just one drink sounded absurd. And it only stopped sounding absurd to me maybe 6 years ago. And I'm 9 years sober now. Because I just couldn't fathom the idea that someone could just have one drink or a few sips and put it down. Because for me, the moment that I had one sip, I'm thinking about the next one, creating some kind of strategy of how I'm going to get the next drink in a way that doesn't make it obvious that I need that next drink. So there was everything would be strategized around the alcohol, and then other drugs came in over time, whether it's cocaine or ketamine, MDMA, etc., etc. So 14 years old, I wish I could say that it didn't start off that bad and then it got worse over time, but it started bad and only got worse, especially when we take into account that blacking out was the norm. Binge drinking was the default. It didn't matter where I was. I could have been at a baby shower. I could have been at a work meeting. I could have been at a rave. I could have been at a wedding. It was all the same. I drank the same in every format. There was no discernment. There was no my addiction, and I don't think addiction has any discernment. It doesn't give a shit where you are. It's going to be the same every single time. So that's where I can sort of take you in terms of my upbringing, the context of my life, where I grew up, the presence of alcohol, and kind of taking you to the tail end of where I then needed to get sober.
So I also think you had a love of cocaine as well, correct?
Yes. But you know what's interesting about that though? My love for alcohol was the strongest. Where cocaine came in, and I always laugh to myself when I think about this. When cocaine came in, I relapsed from 19. I realized that there was a serious problem. And how did I know this? I knew this because I was waking up in strange beds. Sometimes being able to feel that I've had sex, if you know what I mean, because there's a physical, you can feel something, you can feel that something has been done to you, but you don't know what the details are. I had normalized that experience. In my mind, it doesn't matter what's happened to my body. I just have to figure out, how do I get back to West London? How do I get back to Ealing? That's the most important thing. It doesn't matter what has happened. Why? Because I don't even remember it anyway. So I don't have to think about it. I don't have to talk about it. I'm blacking out pretty much every single time. But I'm waking up in strange locations. I'll go out for lunch, and then 3 days later, I'm waking up in Surrey, which is the countryside. So let's say the lunch happens in London, the city. How the fuck have I ended up over there? But again, these experiences were plentiful to the point of the repetition created a normality. So it wasn't until it started to graduate to bruises, until it graduated to me losing a front tooth, but again, it didn't make me stop. It just made me think, okay, I need to work with this a bit smarter. I just need to be a little bit smarter. That's all. Nothing needs to change. Let's just work with this in a better way. But there were way too many of those incidents in collection. So I tried from 19 up until 24 to get sober, and I relapsed 7 times specifically within that time frame. So where cocaine comes in is because more than a few times I remember saying to myself, seeing as alcohol is the problem, I'm just going to stop drinking and do coke instead. That was the new strategy that I started trying. I was like, let's get on the coke, because coke is not the issue. I can put that down, and let's just put down the bit again. It's like Africa. What are you saying? What are you saying? So when it came to drugs, other drugs, I could put them down. there was just something about alcohol. There was something, and it wouldn't surprise me if there was some kind of spiritual agreement that I made with my father when I would watch him drink the way he was drinking. It wouldn't surprise me. And I wonder what you think about things like that, the spiritual aspect of all of this and the kind of silent agreements and commitments we make to the people in our lives and end up committing to their same pattern. So that was my relationship with the drug for the decade. And then again, 7 times I tried to get sober, but it just would not stick. I would be sober for a month, 3 months, 6 months was the longest that I did. It would be 2 months sometimes. And there would just be this itch for destruction and chaos. Sometimes people might think I relapsed because I really missed the booze. It wasn't. I realize now that the booze for me was more of a vehicle for something else. It was a vehicle for a peace, but a peace that was tied with like chaos. There was something exhilarating and something that made me feel alive when I was surrounded by destruction, when I had the adrenaline to figure out how to get back home, the adrenaline to figure out who did I upset? What have I done? Okay, if I apologize, I know that I'll be able to get away with it this time. This constant figuring things out, and getting rewards from it. And then you get away with it and you do it again. So there was more of a deeper addiction for me that was beyond the thing itself. So yes.
Wow. Beautiful. Okay. Oh my God.
There's so much there. I know.
No. Wait, I want a lot there. No, you're my kind of alky too. I
really?
Oh, you're my kind of alky. Yeah. Yeah.
Tell
big
me.
Time. Oh, yeah, I just, binge drinking at 12, all the crazy ideas. I'll just drink wine coolers. I'll just do this. I'll just try this. It's not that bad. But the main thing that you said, I didn't drink double Long Island iced teas because I love it. I did it to shut my fucking head off because I hated myself so much.
Right.
That's the get down. I don't love great wine. Just need a break from that loud fucking world right now. So let me ask you this, Africa. And thank you for mentioning that you tried 7 times. What was the moment? What was your sick and tired moment? Walk the audience through when you tapped out and, thankfully you remained sober since then.
Yes.
So tell me about that day or night or weekend or yeah.
There was no one moment in the typical sense in that there was something more extreme that I did that kind of shook my world up and suddenly I'm awake and, it wasn't really like that. For me, that collection of incidents that I'm talking about from the age of 19, there was just more and more. Just imagine a backpack that you're constantly carrying on your back and you're adding more things, you're adding more resentments, you're adding more confusion, you're adding more anger, you're adding more cheating, you're adding more kleptomania, which was a thing for me at the time as well. To just gain a sense of control. When I would be in these binges, I would kind of just take things. I remember I would have any time that I would have sex with a man, I would steal a book from his house, and it would get me so excited. I would steal.
Oh my God. I've never treated anybody with that kink before, but that's a good one. Oh, I got his Joseph Campbell book.
Oh my God. I got his Wolf of Wall Street. He loves that one.
Oh, that's hot.
There was just all of these things that I was carrying. And I just couldn't run away from it anymore. So I had lost so many people in my life because when you come with an addiction like this, especially depending on the timeline, as in the age, people are moving on. The party stops at some point. People are getting jobs. People are in relationships. People are starting families. People are thinking about where are they going to live. Adulthood is kicking in. The party has to stop at some point. But I hadn't realized that. The party never stopped because it was always on for me, So people dropped off. I only had 2 people in my life by the time that I got sober, my ex and my best friend. And so when I think of that final day on November the 7th, 2016, there was nothing massively profound that had happened. Although a week before that, we had all gone out, the three of us, we had all gone out, and I'd got into a blackout again. I think I hadn't drunk for about a month at the time. So it was almost this thing of catching up. So I always used to feel like, oh, I can play catch up now, because I've been good for a couple of months. So it was one of those things. And I left my boyfriend and my friend at the place that we had gone to together. I got in a car with strange men. I ended up in one of them's bed. I was fully clothed, so I don't think we ended up having sex because maybe he thought I was too drunk, or maybe we did. I wouldn't know, But even though that might sound very extreme to someone else listening to this was the norm. And I remember getting home and my boyfriend was there and he was so broken. He was so broken. It's almost as if I could finally see the level of disrespect that he had been wearing for 2 years. I could finally see it. I'd never seen it before because I was so deep in my selfishness and my ego where everything is about me and what I want to do. And we were living together. But there was no sense of care or consideration for anyone else but me and my binges, and that is it, And it was one of those moments where in my mind, my manipulative mind, I'm thinking, okay, I can just apologize and say that I'll never do it again, and I can go on another sober stint and he'll forgive me. But for the first time, and I always tell him, he's still in my life as a friend, I always tell him how grateful I am for the ultimatum that he gave me, because he was the first ever person to do it. He told me that either I stop this today or this has to end. And I couldn't afford for that relationship to end because he was the only person in the entire world that fully accepted me for who I was. Ooh, the only person, not even my mother, not even anyone, the only person that was in full acceptance, and not in a passive pushover way, but someone that accepted both my shadow and my light and was willing to tell me that, but they were just not willing to put up with this anymore. But again, even that ultimatum, it didn't really register. I was like, fine, I'll stop drinking for another 2 weeks and then we'll get a nice bottle of wine and then we'll, again. And then I decided that I was going to try this thing again so that I could shut him up and I could shut my best friend up and I could just give my body a break because I felt shame from what had happened the week before. And then I went to a couple of AA meetings, again, just to say that I'm trying, I said I'm trying, so I'm going to go. And then something just shifted. It wasn't even like a big, profound shift, but something subtle yet loud shifted. And then I stayed on the path for another week. And then I started my Instagram account, the same one that I have today. Every single post is still there from day one, November the 7th. You can scroll. I don't have too many posts, so you can scroll and see. And I wrote that I am 24 years old and I've found myself in the clutches of alcoholism and I don't know what to do. And I wrote it out loud to no one specific. I had no idea that, everything that's happening now, 9 years later, would have happened. I just desperately needed to get well. And I knew that if I didn't take some kind of public accountability for it, I would relapse again and no one would have to find out. No one would know.
What? That's fascinating. What was it about the public holding you accountable? Where did that track? How did that come into your consciousness?
Yes, I think it's because I've always been a writer since I was 9 or 10. I've always written. That's where I found kind of my safety and expression and fullness in writing. And the reason I say that is because as I was growing up, I did several, and I would also say the kind of generation that I'm from, it wasn't as severe as it is now in terms of people putting everything online, but people would blog, people would share things. So I was in that kind of generation where people were blogging and storytelling. And it wasn't even a overly thought out thing, but I just knew I had to share it publicly in some way. So I just started this Instagram account, and it wasn't my real name. It was under the moniker Blackout Belle, because I used to black out all the time. So of course I had to make it romantic, right? And I had so many photos of alcohol on my phone. So many beautiful photos of cocktails and blah, 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 just dressing up the disease, just putting it in a fancy bow and tie. So I thought, I have all of these photos of alcohol. I don't want to share my identity just yet. So it was anonymous for the first 3 months. So I would post a photo of a cocktail or some kind of booze that I've taken a photo of, and then I'd write a caption about what I was experiencing. If I felt like I was going to drink something or snort or fall back into promiscuity or anything, I would just write about it. But I was writing into the void. It wasn't about community building. Social media was a very different place. But within 3 months, I felt a very strong itch to drink again, because I started to think, I've done enough time. I've been so good. I've shared this publicly. Just one more drink. Maybe if it's not a spirit, maybe if it's a good wine. And I've done that before. It doesn't matter if it's a fucking good wine or not, But the rationalizing started. And then I revealed my face, because I knew that in order to not buy into this lie, I need to not be anonymous, because if I drink and I'm anonymous, no one will know, And then 3 months in, when I revealed my face and kept on sharing, that's when my story was picked up by the UK media, and then everything sort of took off from there.
Wow. So what happened? That's so interesting. So the disease was telling you it's not going to be that bad, shift it up,
Yes.
maybe different wine. And then this article, what was it about the article that, what shifted you into consciousness again and to stay sober? What pushed you through? Was it this, like, I have an opportunity now, I have a shot, this feels good? What was that moment?
So 2 things happened. I've written 2 open letters in my life that have completely transformed everything. The first one that I wrote was in it was in January 2017. And I posted it to my Facebook. It's when I was getting that itch 3 months in, and I'm getting that itch to self-destruct again, just go back into chaos. No one has to know. You can get back on the horse again. You've done it before. You can do it again. Just have one drink. That was the narrative in my mind. And then I wrote a very long open letter, which I posted onto Facebook, where my friends and family could see it. And I owned up fully to the addiction. I owned up to the promiscuity. I owned up to the kleptomania. I owned up to the cheating and the manipulating. And I just, everything, I just brought it to the fore. So I freed myself in that way. I would say my first big act, apart from starting that account and sharing, it was my first big act of undoing self-censorship. Because I remember my boyfriend's mum at the time, I showed her the letter before I posted it. She loved it. She said it was great, but she thought it was a form of self-flagellation. She thought that maybe I'm just punishing myself, and maybe I don't need to share this. I can kind of just, when you do those wellness rituals of writing the thing you want to say, and then you burn it, and then you sort of release it. She suggested that maybe I do something like that. And I said, no, this needs to be public. So I shared it, and my friends and family saw it. And finally, for the first time, they knew what I had been experiencing for the past 10 years. So that was the first thing that I did. And then I continued to share on social media. And then one of the biggest national platforms on TV called ITV, they found my open letter, I believe, and they found my account. And at the time, I'm 24 years old. I'm sharing in this very raw and open way. And anyone listening to this, you can go and see everything. And it can allow for you to see that the person that I am now, the Africa that I am now, has been in training for a very, very long time. And it was a very compelling story. And also the immigrant angle of it, it was a compelling story, So I got a segment for Dry January on ITV, and then that just took everything just sort of expanded from then. It gave me a sense of purpose because finally I realized that, oh my goodness, this thing that I've been told I can only talk about in the basements of churches, this thing that I can only talk about behind closed doors. People actually want to know. People are experiencing this. People that don't, quote unquote, look like addicts are experiencing the exact same thing that I am. People my age and younger are trapped by binge drinking, and they're being told that it's a rite of passage and that it's normal. I found the voice that I always had, but that voice had been in the shadows, and I just hadn't realized. That voice had been in anonymity for 3 months, but 10 years, really. So everything just sort of took off from there. And that's when I went deeper into wanting to understand the nature of self-destruction and why we get addicted to chaos. That's when I found out about Jungian psychology and the human shadow. That's when I was able to stop moralizing my addiction. It didn't make me a bad person. There was something that I was experiencing that I could look at in an objective way and still take accountability and still take responsibility for it. And I think I've always had a gift of talking about things that are supposedly shameful without shame. There's nothing that I'm ashamed of. No one walking on this earth could ever shame me, especially because I'm more than happy to own all of it, even in its finest details, And I think at the time, and maybe even now, that was just very rare, especially in a non-performative way, because again, I just needed to get well. I didn't give a shit about a community, didn't give a shit about followers or a platform. I still don't. I just needed to get well and understand the human condition. So that's how that next sort of phase.
So you basically did a public 4-step.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Which is quite, some would say insane. Some would say, no, brave. Some would say it was God's purpose. I'm assuming you'll tell me in doing that, people are going, thank you. Somebody's finally talking how I'm feeling. They're like, wow, my God. And I'm assuming it gave you purpose. It gave you, I'm not so alone. It gave you, it sounds like a mantra and like, I have to keep doing this. Is that accurate?
Yes, absolutely. It helped me stay sober. It gave me a level of accountability that went beyond me, because now that sense of community started to find its way to me for the first time, because although I went to a few AA meetings, I didn't really connect with it. And now when I look back, I realize I didn't really connect with AA because, again, I'm from a culture where you pray things away. You don't speak about it in public in that way. So I think I forced myself to find an alternative, but I ended up finding that alternative through writing, ended up finding that alternative through my community, but also through other people's testimonies and stories and friends of mine who were in AA who would tell me about the different steps and the different things you can do. And I got so much from people. I didn't do it alone. I think it would be so easy for me to sit here and talk about my willpower and I did this but it's no. I truly don't believe that you beat addiction alone. I think most of us just don't realize the many hands that have played a role in us getting well, Even that person that still humanized you and loved you and told you that you were not broken, told you that you're not a fuck up. You're doing fucked up things, but you're not a fuck up, okay? There's been so many people along the way that have contributed to my sobriety, but that level of visibility quite early on and personal accountability and just writing, it really helped me stay on path. It really did.
So you got onto that show, a lot of, things started popping. You're 24, you're right. People are noticing you. And what kind of walk us through kind of where you got to where you're at today a little bit. And then I've got a bunch of questions about your journey. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So I would say from then about 24, I was still working I was working in advertising at the time. I had been in hospitality up until getting sober. But again, even hospitality itself was a way for me to hide my drinking, because you can drink, you can do all these things and no one would really know, And drugs are a huge thing, especially cocaine, very big in hospitality. So my addiction could go under the radar for a very long time. But when I got sober, I shifted completely in terms of what I was doing. So I was a receptionist at an ad agency. And I think after about 4 months, I applied for a job to actually join an ad team. So I had a full-time job that allowed me to be responsible for the first time in my life. But everything that I was now doing under my Africa Brooke writing, because I changed the Blackout Bell name, I stopped hiding, and I was like, okay, let me just fully own who I am and be honest about the path that I'm on. So I was getting booked to speak. I was doing a lot of things for free, in the beginning, which I think is really important because you find your voice in that way. And I think it just allowed me to kind of understand my story, to understand what resonates with people, but what is actually the important message here? What is at the core of what I'm trying to explore? But it also gave me enough space to get trained in very specific things. So I ended up, I think from about 25, I started training in developmental coaching because I realized that although I don't want to be coaching people in terms of addiction, because I think there are way more very, very knowledgeable experts who can work and support people in terms of addiction and trauma, etc. I knew that I wanted to do work that explores the human condition. I knew that I wanted to do work that understands the human shadow. I knew that I wanted to explore the nature of courage and audacity and bravery and shame. So I knew that there's kind of like there's a nuance to what I want to study and what I want to look at. So I got trained as a developmental coach, and then I got trained in different aspects of Jungian psychology so I could really understand it on a granular level. So I just equipped myself with as much knowledge as I could before I was even working with anyone until I got accredited as a developmental coach a few years down the line. And then I started my coaching and consulting firm because I realized that I could also fuse different things that I was learning in advertising. I could create something that I'd never seen, essentially, because I hadn't seen a consultant or a coach that specializes in Jungian psychology, but can also look at it from a business perspective, a personal perspective. They can also look at addiction. And just, I had to create the very thing that I had never seen before. So that started taking off on its own. And then I went full time into everything that I do in about 2018, I believe it was. And I knew that the pillars that I want to be looking at in my work and everything that I commit to for the rest of my life is self-sabotage and self-censorship, because those were the two things that had had a complete grip on my entire existence before I got sober, and even after in different ways as well. But when I was able to look at so many people's ills and troubles and even their points of conflict, it always came back to self-sabotage in some way, or a censoring of desire, a censoring of truth, a censoring of something, and a rejection of the self. So I knew that these things can allow me to explore so many different things. And I guess my work has just evolved in that way, where I know what the foundational pillars are to what I do, but I can explore it from so many different angles, which is what then allowed me to when I started to notice the level of intolerance in our society about 5 years ago, especially in 2020, because I had been studying the shadow and self-sabotage for such a long time, I was able to see that what we call cancel culture is a form of collective sabotage. You have people that are so deeply embedded in their own individual states of self-sabotage that they come together as a group and they work against their own best interest and the interests of other people. So I was able to see that everything that has stemmed from my journey with addiction, even though it's been very unconventional and even strange at times, I can now see it reflected in the collective. So that's when I started studying woke culture and cancel culture and intolerance, and the repression of expression and speech. And it sort of led me to the past 5 years of really wanting to understand what has happened to us culturally, where we've become so afraid of our innermost thoughts, not even what we externalize, but even in our own minds, we have made ourselves so afraid of the mob, you know. So I would say all of that has led me to this point where I now look at things on a much more wider level. I still do the personal, but the collective I currently find very fascinating.
Okay, I love it. Congratulations. I'm
Thank
so
you.
excited to see what you're going to be doing. Talk about those early consultant jobs. You're getting your first clients, and also you had a very interesting relationship with money that I want you to talk about, because I think it's really important about, you know, it was okay to do it for free, but when it came time to, you know, can you talk our listeners through that? It's powerful.
Absolutely. So for me, money has always been an interesting one, because growing up, we didn't really have it. We had it, but we didn't really. We were in such a state of survival that there was never really any excess, even though my mother particularly always tried her best. If it was a birthday or Christmas, she really, really tried her best. But excess was never the norm. And conversations about money were never really had, unless they were overheard conversations about us not having any money or there being financial stress in the home. So financial abundance was just not really a thing. So I had to work through my own spiritual, emotional, psychological relationship with money from the age of 27 onwards. Because again, exactly as you put it, I was so comfortable with doing things for free. I expected even to do things for free or at very, very low cost. I remember actually, I think it was, I was 27 at the time, and I was doing my first ever workshop, and it was on how to overcome self-sabotage. And it was going to be for about 50 people, and it was a 3-hour session, 3.5-hour session actually. And I was charging £20, and I was so scared. I thought I was robbing people of their money. I was thinking, who am I to charge £20 for people to come and learn from me for 3 hours? I had an entire complex about it. And I remember even calling a friend and asking, is this too much? I couldn't even fathom the idea that I could be paid to do something that came so easily to me, to speak and to work with ideas, especially ideas that are objectively quite abstract. I really do believe that I have a gift for taking things that are quite complex, but putting them forward in a way that is easy to understand, you know? And I think because I've always written and read from a very young age, I just know how to work with language and speech. And so a lot of these things come to me quite easily. I've had to refine them and work at them, but they're kind of innate skills, you know? So I really had some deeply embedded beliefs about, you only get paid if things are hard. If things are easy, you don't get paid. You do it for free. And that is one of the biggest lies that so many of us buy into. Even those of us that are making good money, we still have that underlying belief, so we can never really enjoy our finances. We'll sabotage them unconsciously because we believe that it needs to be difficult. Who am I to be making this kind of money, you know? And I was saying, who am I to make this kind of money with £20? £20. So by the time I was being offered to speak for £500, and then it became 1,000, and then 2,000. Now it's 5,000. Now it's 10,000. Now it's more than that. Now it's, you name what it is that you want, Africa. I didn't know what to fucking do. It was too much. My nervous system had not caught up with the objective reality of what life was like now. And I always say this to people, but you have to make sure that your internal world is prepared for the bigness that you want to hold externally. Otherwise, you will sabotage yourself over and over and over again, and you won't even realize why you're doing it. So the reason that I was feeling so deeply uncomfortable was not necessarily because of the figure amount. The reason I was feeling uncomfortable in the beginning financially is because my mother is a nurse. As a nurse here in the UK, especially at that time that I would be referring to, she would have been getting paid maybe 1,800 or at the most, maybe 2,100 a month. Okay. And this is working even 50, 60 hours a week as a nurse, because she could work as much as she wanted to. And she was working for people here in the UK, but to send money back home. So the way that it worked for me, and it's so sneaky, I invite anyone listening to this to think about where this might be showing up for them. I wouldn't accept any gigs that meant that I earn more than my mother. And I was doing this so unconsciously in the beginning, so unconsciously. I would just delay replying to the email until they find someone else, or until I know it's going to fall through, and then respond that I didn't see it, you know. But it was a way so that I could not get paid, because who the fuck am I to make £5,000 in half an hour? Right? That's the narrative. Who are you? While your mother is working 50 hours a week for £1,800 a month, you know? And it didn't even allow me to entertain the idea that actually it's important that I break the generational patterns of poverty in our family. It's important that more money comes into the hands of good people that are generous and can give more. We actually need good-hearted, community-led people to be rich and wealthy. Yes, we do. We absolutely, it didn't allow me to realize that money means more options, Africa. You have more options. Your mother won't have to work 50, 60 hours a week if there is abundance in the family. The babies that are being born into the family will see that it's possible for people like us to live with ease. It didn't allow me to see that. It was just, who are you to be making this much, you know? So I would sabotage those opportunities. So it wasn't until I did, again, coming back to shadow work, which is essentially looking at these repressed aspects of self. So I had repressed any possibility for abundance or wealth or resourcefulness, to look at it and to ask why. What silent agreements do I have to poverty? What silent agreements do I have to people in my generation where maybe I feel like I will be leaving my family behind if I live well? So we all need to be at the same level together, you know? Look at that and interrogate that. So I started doing that level of money work in 2017, 18. And that allowed me to actually create a company that was profitable. It allowed me to make sure that even when I'm pricing, I'm not charging my worth and tying it to my sense of self. No, I'm charging the worth of the services that I provide. I'm charging the worth of the impact that I can make in sitting with someone for half an hour or even 20 minutes. I'm charging for the investment that I have made in my education and my intellectual property for the past decade. That's what I'm charging for. I was able to just look at it in a very, very, very different way, but I couldn't have done that. I couldn't have done that level of strategy without looking at my emotional and spiritual relationship with money, which I had to do urgently.
So what's your belief about money now?
Oh, that's a good one. My belief about money now is that money means more options. And I think that one for me is a very, very important one, because there's so much hopelessness in the world. And a lot of it is because people don't realize the options that are available to them. And especially depending on where you're from, that's a deeply held belief that I don't have any option. This job that I have to hold on to it for the next 30 years. I have no option but to do this. When actually, even if you just turn just a fraction, you will see something else that is available. So for me, I think I really had just ideas about what it means to be rich, you know, that it means that you're greedy, that it means that you're selfish, that it means that you're a hoarder, that it means that you have a love of money. You know, people misinterpret the word in the Bible, which is actually the love of money is the root of all evil, but people have turned it into being money is the root of all evil. So people believe that to be a spiritual person, you need to reject money, but it's just an energy. It's an exchange. It returns in the same way that it leaves. It allows for choice and freedom and options. So that is my belief now. It's a very open-hearted belief instead of a restrictive, sort of cynical view.
Beautiful. What at
Mm.
27 years of age made you think, I could do a course on sabotage? We're not just here to be sober. We're here to take risks. We're here to change the narrative. We're here to bet on ourselves. And I want to understand what made you bet on yourself that day.
Oh, that's good. You know what it is? And I love that you mentioned the word risk because I think it underpins all of this. I think it's so easy to hear some of the things that I'm talking about and to think that it was just I just decided to be courageous. I just decided to be brave. I just decided to be audacious. Yes, I decided to be those things, and it was fucking terrifying. I was scared and I faced rejection. I had so many times of putting things out and nothing happening. Because I'll tell you something, there's a difference between people pressing like and people parting with their money. You have to face, right?
Amen, sis. God, that's beautiful.
Big difference.
Right.
Big difference. And it can be very humbling. But you know what? If you are truly entrepreneurial, if you're truly committed to risk and to change and a mission, you show up again. You show up on Instagram Live, which is what I did from 2017, when there's one person in the room and you speak as if there are 1,000 people in the room. That's what I did again and again. And even when that one person leaves because they accidentally joined, they didn't actually mean to be in there. They just thought, oh shit. You stay and you deliver the class and the talk as if there's a auditorium of people looking at you and smiling. I have done that over and over and over again. I have spoken when my hands were literally shaking and continued to speak. And maybe my voice was even shaking a little bit and I continued to speak. I created things that maybe didn't land with people so well because they just weren't ready for it. Because again, the conversations that I'm having, I'm not telling people to just love themselves and manifest. It would be easier if that was the conversation that I'm having, just be confident. But I'm asking people to pretty much undertake and undergo a spiritual excavation. I'm asking people to be extremely uncomfortable and to do a level of self-inquiry that most people just won't fucking do. I know that my work goes against the grain in so many ways, but I'm so in it for the long haul. And I think that's the mindset that I've always had. I am so in it for the long haul. This is not a flash in the pan for me. This is not just a moment in time. I take so many moments to sit back and to observe. I don't just add shit into the noise and to see how much money can I make from this. I make very good money for very good reason. And it's because I'm in it for the long haul. And I'm so committed to mastery. I am stupidly committed to mastery. So I've had moments of needing to ask myself, Africa, are you really in it for the long haul? If you are, then this one person in the room is 100 people in the room. If you are, then your hands shaking. They're not shaking because you're scared, you're excited. That's why they're shaking. So I think there's a way of reframing that I've always done. And I still do because I still have to do it. But so I think there's a level of humility that I've always had as well and still have. So that's a lot there to kind of answer your question, but those are the different things I would say.
Oh, I love that. Young was a big influence in your life.
Oh my God, absolutely. Absolutely.
Talk about who Carl Jung is and how it's been applicable for you. And
yes.
Yeah, I'd be curious.
Yes. For me, it was actually when I came across the term self-sabotage in early sobriety. And I swear to you, that term, it freed me so much because for a long time, I thought the thing that I was dealing with was really a moral failing. I thought that I was just truly a fucked up person and it was just the reality of it. You know, removing the alcohol was one thing, but as I'm sure you know very, very well, that's when everything actually floods you. That's when you see the truth of what is, because I know we think I just have to put the vice down and then I'll be good. And then all of this is going to go away. And then I'm suddenly going to be reliable again. I'll never lie again. I'll never cheat again. You know, I'll never steal again. I will never have the desire. It was all the booze. It was the coke. It was the thing, right? So we outsource. And I was so looking forward to finally having peace. But guess fucking what? It wasn't time yet. It wasn't time. I had to earn that peace. So when I found the term self-sabotage, And I always describe this in my book. I talk about it as it's essentially when you're the one poking holes in your own ship. You've been looking around thinking, who the fuck, where are these holes coming from? It's me and this knife. It's me that is just poking holes in the ship and I'm sinking. No one else is doing it, you know? So when I came across the term self-sabotage and understood that there is this thing we do where we don't believe that we're worthy of certain things. So when we actually start to gain them or attain them, it scares us. It feels very unfamiliar. There's a level of uncertainty there. So we prefer what it is we know, even if it's destruction or chaos, or even if it's just pulling the plug on yourself in the most profound ways. So coming across that just allowed for me to go into it as an area of study, which is then when I discovered the concept of the shadow, the idea of we have our ideal self that we present to the world. So maybe you present to be a very calm and patient and loving person, but actually behind closed doors, a lot of the time you're extremely judgmental. You're very impatient. You're very manipulative. You have all of these shadow traits that you allow to come out to play when no one else is watching. And then you present this version to yourself and other people, you know. So it allowed me to understand the kind of split. Jekyll and Hyde is the perfect example of this. You know, we have so many references in the world of art that point to the human shadow. But from me giving those examples, we all have it. We all have a shadow, by the way. It's not a case of I have one, I don't have one anymore. And, you know, we all have one. But it's just learning how to understand it and work with it so you can integrate it. So you're not living in a fragmented way. So you can accept all facets of yourself without pretending you're any one thing, including if you truly believe you're a bad person, you've cast your good traits into the shadow. You've cast out the joy into the shadow, the pleasure, the play, and the curiosity. I think it's so easy to think shadow is the dark, nasty things, but also it's the beautiful things that we cast into the shadow, and we forget. We forget, you know, and this mainly happens in adulthood when people grow up and they become cynical and jaded and bitter and they cast out their playfulness. You know, I don't have time for that. I'm not a child. I can't play. I'm too busy, you know. So we cast out so many other things. But Jung was and is very inspirational to me because he allowed for me to understand myself, but also he's allowed me to understand the world because the teachings just continue to be more timeless and timeless and timeless, right?
Amen. Amen. My favorite Jung quote, I think you'll appreciate this. I wrote it, is until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
Oh, it's so good.
Oh,
Oh, it's good, isn't it?
You like that? Yeah.
I love that. It will direct your life and you will call it fate. You know what that makes me think of? It makes me think of that thing people do of, this is just who I am, you know, when people double down on their persona, this is just who I am. And we affirm all of these things in a very rigid way when actually it's your wounding. It's your trauma. It's the generational patterns you've picked up without even deciding. They were just handed over to you like a piece of cloth. And you just took it and wrapped it over yourself and said, this is who I am, you know, and you become so convicted. So that idea of it directing your life and your decisions and your choices so unconsciously, and you're just calling it fate. This is who I am, you know.
Ooh. Let me ask you this. Walk me through. You have a very big life, a busy life. When the world gets loud, when darkness is running some jive on you, when some bullshit happens, how do you ground yourself? What's your mantra? What's your routine? How do you come back to center? How do you start your day over? I'd love to hear about what you do. Yeah, what your process is.
Yeah. So what I will say is that I live a very, honestly, I live a very spacious life. If you were to spend the day with me and we were just hanging out, we'd just be hanging out, there would not be much happening. And that's a good thing. I would be going for very long walks. I love a long walk and I love a hike. I would be having my tea ritual, which I have every single day. Chinese loose leaf tea. So it's like a ceremony that I have for myself every single day. I would be reading, I would be napping. I nap every single day between 3 and 5. So I'm due a nap very soon. What else do I do? I spend a lot of time with friends. I live a very beautiful and simple life, and it's very spacious. And that's because, and I want to turn this around to you too, the question, but it's because I was in so much chaos for 10 years, 10 very essential years from 14 up until 24, where I'm supposed to be transitioning from girlhood into conscious womanhood and being in relationship and learning my body and my mind and my spirit. I was on autopilot. I was not here, you know, and and when I was, you know, feeling something tangible, it was just chaos and destruction and shame. And sure, there was fun. There was a lot of fun along the way. I will not lie. I've had a lot of fucking fun in my life. I think that's why I don't miss anything, because I've had enough fun for all of us. But there was no spaciousness, there was no rest, there was no ease. So even though I'm running a company and I do several things, it's really organized in a way that honors the spaciousness. That is something that is so non-negotiable for every single project that I do, everything that I say yes to. There needs to be inbuilt spaciousness into that. So that's kind of how I live my life. I go to the cinema quite a lot, the theater. I love art. I also write screenplays and playwriting. I'm working on a play right now. I want to fictionalize aspects of my work. So I'm very obsessed with the idea of when your public self takes over your private self. So I want to fictionalize that and write something about that. So that's kind of that's my life, I'd say.
That's a heck of a life you have. Yeah, that's great. Well, okay. Yeah. You know, listen, the great teachers, the great healers are always laughing.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're heavy, you're not free.
Yes, it's so true.
And you gotta goof on yourself. Yeah. So okay, let's talk about.
Can you tell me? Can you tell me what it looks like for you? Because I'm just so curious, just from our conversation and from your energy. I'm curious for you. How do you create a level of rest and spaciousness in your life, which I imagine is quite demanding in so many ways too?
It is. Well, I have a couple beliefs that I think you'll appreciate. One is the world doesn't need to change. I do.
Oh gosh, yes.
And the only person I suffer from is Seano McFarlane. Okay. And it's unacceptable to do blame. And we have a sign on the door here, which I hope you can come to, Rochelle. No shame allowed.
Yes.
Okay. And a lot of billionaires that I'm blessed to work with, okay, want to be me. And I say that humbly because they don't know the art of riding the bike, just having a bicycle ride, and the beauty of a $3 street taco and jumping in the ocean for free. So part of my practice is, and I'm not perfect by any means, is I never forget where I came from.
Yes.
Ever.
Yes.
And to work with people, to have their trust that they pay me their hard-earned money to crack their hearts and let some fucking light in is the greatest honor. And so I better fucking bring it. And for me to bring it, I have to be at the ultra high frequency. So I can't get caught up in dumb shit.
Yes.
Can't get caught. And I just have to. And I'm crazier than most. I have to work harder than the most. And I'm cool with that. So I have a whole morning thing that I do that gets me centered, that I will, no matter where I'm at in the world, I won't go off it.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. I feel so deeply inspired by you. And I'm glad that I asked you that question. And I resonate so much in the sense that I'm always in a state of gratitude. And I truly believe that sobriety is the foundation of all of that, because life could be very different. Even for both of us, we wouldn't be sitting here. We might not even be here, you know. I can never, ever, ever take it for granted. So even when very similar to you, the caliber of people that I work with, even people that I grew up watching on TV in Zimbabwe, people that I was listening to on the radio back home, you know, on my grandma's farm in Gweru, it blows my entire mind And I wouldn't be able to do the work that I do as effectively as I do it, as thoughtfully as I do it, if I didn't allow for rest and simplicity, and a beautiful simplicity, which is exactly what I hear you talking about, the freedom that comes with simplicity, you know. Oh, I love that.
I want to talk about forgiveness and why forgiveness is so important. Tell me your process. And I love what you talk about in your writings with your father and what you had to come to.
Yes. You know what, I'm so glad you bring that up, because it means that it comes to the fore, even for me on a personal level. Forgiveness is still something that I'm working through and with in real time right now, because as I get older, so I'm 32 now, as I get older myself, I start to understand my parents just in a very different way. I start to humanize them, especially my father, who I was the most similar to. I've just started to humanize him in a way that I'd never done before, you know. He died when he was 41. So I'm getting closer and closer to the age that he was. And I realized just how young he was and the things that were on his shoulders, the responsibility that he had as a man, and the cultural context of where there's just so much that I understand now. You know, he didn't choose. He made his choices, but he never would have thought, you know, as a small boy, that when I grow up, I want to be an addict. He never would have thought that, you know. So there's a level of humanizing that I have been doing for quite a while, and forgiveness has been part and parcel of it, because I know that to live a truly free life where I'm not holding any resentments, I choose forgiveness. And it's not that I have to forgive. I don't have to do anything, but I choose forgiveness. And that's happening because I'm learning how to humanize my father. So it's something that I'm experiencing in real time and have been in process with for, I'd say, a few years now.
Wow. Beautiful. I want to talk about intimacy, reclaiming your body.
Yes.
You talked about beautifully, eloquently, vulnerably about, you know, you were groomed, you know, there's no birds and the bees conversation. You were groomed on your pornography.
Yes.
And how you, and sobriety and your elevation and what you've learned and about that. I'd be fascinated for our listeners to hear your process on that, please.
Yeah, of course. I mean, sex and alcohol for me was so intrinsically linked. So we're talking from 13, 14, right? But before that, at 10 years old, 2020, 2002, porn was my first teacher. It showed me what intimacy was, quote unquote, supposed to look like, but it mainly showed me what a woman was supposed to perform. And that word perform is very, very intentional, because that's what I learned to do until I got sober. Even just a bit after that, I would say sex for me started to not feel like a performance from the age of maybe 26 or 27, because finally I learned what it looks like to actually relax in my body instead of trying to contort my body into all of these positions for the male gaze, which was exactly what I had seen and had learned in porn. But it also allowed for me to realize that, oh my goodness, my pleasure is also mine. I get to ask for what it is that I want. It's crazy to know just how much painful sex I had put up with, and especially women and girls, because they believe that they're supposed to be performing enjoyment. They're supposed to be performing excitement, that if they say that something doesn't feel good, then they're ruining the moment. You know, because in porn, no one says, a woman doesn't say she's uncomfortable. She doesn't say this doesn't feel good. She gets into whatever position, does whatever is asked, rarely even asked. You're just put into a position and then you just accept it and you perform enjoyment. So all of these things that I had to unravel and realize that porn was making its way into my most intimate moments. And I've been looking at this through the lens of self-sabotage for a long time, in the context of we're sabotaging true intimacy and true vulnerability and connection. And it's from both sides. It's not just women. it's not just men, it's all of us. You know, porn is seeping its way into our most intimate moments. And we're not even asking ourselves, is this truly what it looks like to be intimate and in connection with someone? So for me, when I realized that it had been a part of my life for nearly 3 decades, that shocked me because I hadn't even realized. It's kind of the norm. You normalize it, you know, which is why now, if that was the case for me in 2002, where it was much harder to get hold of, it was mainly videos or DVDs or magazines, there was a bit of friction, right? I cannot imagine what it's like now when every single child has a smartphone. Every single child has a smartphone. It is so accessible. There aren't any barriers. There's no need for ID. There's just a question, are you 18? Even if I'm 10, of course, I'm going to say I'm 18 because I need to, you know, there's no friction whatsoever. So I'm so grateful that, again, coming back to sobriety, because I truly can't give this awareness, I can't give credit to anything else but, you know, it could be God and sobriety. But if I hadn't realized the impact of porn on my sex life, I still wouldn't be free within myself today. I really wouldn't be. I would be sober from the booze, but I would still have something else as my master. I would still have something else as my master.
Let me ask you this. If you could whisper one thing to every person who's trapped in self-doubt right now, what would it be?
I would just say something that is quite simple, actually, and something that I remind myself of often, is that I need to be willing to be surprised by myself. Be willing to be surprised by yourself. We severely underestimate how courageous we are, severely. And for me, that very simple mantra and mindset has allowed me to do some of the bravest things that I've ever done in moments where I've been flooded with nothing but doubt and couldn't make any logical sense of it. To me, that mantra of Africa, be willing to be surprised by yourself in this moment, I find to be so powerful. So that's the small little thing, small little seed that I would pass on.
What's your prayer for the world right now?
My prayer for the world is that we learn to hold our own contradictions so that we can become better at holding the contradictions of others. That's my prayer.
Oof. Amen.
Yes.
Thank you for cracking my heart today. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your experience. Thank you for your inspiration. God bless. Godspeed. It's a real treat. I know God loves me so much that he brought you into my consciousness for the show today. Thank you. The Seano Show is a production of iHeart Podcasts, hosted by me, Seano McFarlane, produced by Pod People and 28th Ave. Our lead producer is Keith Corlick. Our executive producer is Lindsay Hoffman. Marketing lead is Ashley Weaver. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.